Welcome to the next chapter of Mina Star, a near-future epic about humanity's reckoning after the collapse of the insane logic of mutually assured destruction, tracing how the ruins of the nation-state order give rise to the Charter, a new consensus-driven civilization built on the principle that every life is sovereign. In this chapter, we follow Saila Okalik, a gifted young technician inside an Arctic arcology, who is pulled toward a vision of the Charter that promises dignity and safety for everyone. But she insists that how you achieve that future matters as much as the goal itself. Renata embodies the same end vision through a harsher path, believing coercion and sacrifice are acceptable tools, and their encounter frames the story as a choice between two methods for building the same world. Chapter 9, Audiobook Arcology 2045. Saila Okalik, a small wiry adult in her mid-20s with steady dark eyes, tied and retied her long sleek black hair, her mother's hair, as she tried to settle her nerves. I wish I had naturally curly hair, she thought. As the lecture start time approached, she waited outside the shared workspace door for the occupant to finish cleaning and leave. She always chose a workspace as close as possible to the center of a 1,000 by 1,000 door square of office space, for good luck. A lighter-than-air platform softened the slow rise of resonance frequency, and Saila placed her hand on one of the spars, closed her eyes, and held her breath to listen. It is just close enough to feel like hearing whale song through the ice while hunting with my Enoch, she thought. A tear formed at the corner of her eye, and she gave herself one breath to remember before wiping it away when the tiny Pi-class AI announced, "Time exceeds socially acceptable norms." The door slid open, and a disheveled but surprisingly clean-smelling man trailed off speaking into the shut-down video wall. Irritably, he quickly departed and simply grunted acknowledgement of Saila, as he scheduled a workspace session in another location. Saila angrily turned and called out, "Hey man, you didn't clean up!" But the man was long gone, so she tidied and wiped down the surfaces. As she settled, waiting for the lecture, the room announced, "Cleaning deposit transferred to your wallet. Thank you for your duty." As Professor Lena Kamenik stepped up to her podium, Saila slipped on what was outwardly a VR headset, but was modified to communicate discreetly. Professor Lena began her lecture with, "A reminder, you are here because you've demonstrated a rare mix of rebellion, compliance, and collaboration to have potential for leadership." Professor Lena smiled as she waited for the low chuckling that rippled through the shared VR space to die down. For a future habitat in the shadow of Mercury or floating in Venus, we are all here for the sole purpose of learning how to live in those future habitats without killing each other. Today's topic on that theme is collapse. Saila absently inspected her emergency rebreather as she remembered how many still acclimating hopefuls were injured in the last fire drill, when the oxygen was rapidly pumped out and nitrogen pumped in. A young teen's voice piped into Saila's headset asking, "Why are you in this boring lecture?" She grinned broadly and retorted, "Nukaktu, do you need a diaper change?" While maintaining an outward focus on Professor Lena's lecture, Saila observed with gentleness her little brother, Saila Okalik, turning bright red in response to his baby name. He glanced at Trina Karimi, his crush, who was an older teen. She thought, "Akiak? You will have to look at her eyes to win her heart." Not knowing what to say, he just said in frustration, "Saila!" She realized she had genuinely hurt Akiak, so she sent him a DM with a sorry emoji. Turning on a serious tone, Saila said, "Thanks all for joining. Our sponsor, Nouveau Hanseatic Vibe, has hired us to mask the escape route for a package." Renata Gomez, who regardless of gender magnetically drew every eye to her, coughed softly to interject. "Nouveau Hanseatic Vibe has fractured and I represent a more active faction." Confusion filled the silence for a moment until Trina said, "Nouveau hacknapped for a pittance ransom the colonial pipeline a second time, bankrupted Menschkar by hijacking the fleet dispatcher, and released the co-pilot Shellworm. And you represent the more active faction?" Renata nodded and said, "We have guns and drones." Saila's shocked reaction was immediately apparent to everyone in the lecture, and Professor Lena's voice cut sharply across the interface. "Saila, do you have something you want to share?" Saila took a deep breath and said, The late Bronze Age collapse is usually framed as a political or military failure, but it was rooted in the unintended consequences of stallion domestication, a genetic breakthrough that likely occurred only once or twice. That single innovation radically increased mobility and grazing pressure, just as the plains' fertility declined with the loss of the glacial melt fertility premium. Systems that had appeared stable failed quickly and at scale as increasingly mobile populations propagated outward faster than ever as transportation costs dropped. The first collapse appears near the origin of the domesticated stallion line around the Caspian, as steppe pressure pushed connected populations and contributed to the Near East collapse through the Sea Peoples, before rippling east as the stallion gene spread more slowly, reaching the Meds in the Iranian highlands and later the Quanrong in China. This is why you see populations deep in Siberia that early observers described as looking Celtic, like the Tarim mummies. When horses were reintroduced to the American Great Plains, the same mechanism replayed without genetic constraints, compressing what unfolded over centuries in Eurasia into decades. That compression makes the process visible. The risk is that a seemingly positive productivity gain inside a closed loop, for example in a poorly resilient system like a space habitat, does not cause failures gradually. It fails all at once. The lecture interface stayed quiet for 5 heartbeats. Then applause spread across the room. Saila felt deeply intense shame at Professor Lena's undisguised pride in her star pupil. The trio sat in a crowded common eating space as people rinsed their plates and cutlery, then were whisked off by the constant flow of drones delivering food and taking waste. Aromas from around the world filled the air, spices and steam and warm oil layering and settling into a gentle harmony. You said we were working for the nouveau Hanseatic vibe. You know the Robin Hood folks. What are we, terrorists? Trina's very scared face demanded an answer that Saila did not have. Knowing it was impossible, Saila suggested it anyway. We just walk away. Akiak said with a shaky voice. Saila, she thought. He has a man's frame and voice, but I can only see a chubby baby with a habit of biting my knee hard. We can't just walk away because of the conditions on the smart contract. Saila closed her eyes to mentally squeeze her panic into a box buried deep in her mind, and with open eyes, clarity came to her. What about Arcadia or Sari Pramana? The hacker handle meant authority justified by essence. And that was exactly what they needed. Plus, Sari owed them a lot. Trina and Akiak nodded in agreement as the group waited for Renata to join their eating space. The charter factions they worked with had always been outsiders. Now, with the Mirov arcologies formally aligned, they were here in the flesh. Renata approached their tables and asked, "Why can't we sit in a restaurant?" Despite his fear, Akiak openly admired Renata, so was eager to explain arcology life. Everything in the arcology mirrors how life will be like in Mercury and Venus, where living space will be a premium, so each space is structured for maximum utilization. Chefs work in time-limited common kitchens. Sealed packet ingredients arrive through pneumatic tubes from the centralized warehouse, and meals are delivered by drones to a common eating space. Renata looked confused and said, "You mean the old bank tubes?" Akiak started to laugh, because he did not know what a bank was, nor a bank's tubes, but sobered as he remembered his fear and said in a quieter voice, "Freight uses another system." Saila cut in and said, "Renata, why is Coercion Dieftetizi hiring us?" Saila thought. On video, Renata had seemed like the rest of the idealists in Nouveau. In person, representing an armed and newly formed faction founded by a former PMC leader, she screams danger. Renata openly observed each of them, then nodded and said, "Every revolution began with the blood of the youth. First tell me how you pulled off the stunt in the lecture. You were not listening, so how did you do it?" Trina snorted and said, "I did the hard part. Saila emailed Professor Lena, an innocent little worm, to figure out which cluster stored the professor's emails. Then I worked enough shifts to get the authority to send long-term backups to Saila's refurbishment shop, where she lifted the lecture notes. Renata did not look impressed. The three of them glanced at each other and sat in silence until Renata finally said, So you hacked the professor's computer? With a sigh of relief, Saila explained. Yes, the one in the cloud. Renata nodded and said, If you lied, I would have dropped this team. A finger of ice ran down Saila's back at the way Renata said it. What coercion d'Eftetisi needs this team to do? Trina and Akiak are safe. We will meet you on the other side. Saila tried to keep the immense relief out of her face as she received the hidden haptic message, but her body resisted her control and shuddered. Misunderstanding, Renata placed a hand on her shoulders and warmly said, You did very well. Feeling the weight of Renata's eyes, Saila nodded slowly, but Saila's eyes drifted to Renata's hands when the bloody memory of Isla's pleading eyes was violently thrusted into her mind. Renata's eyes expressed rare emotion, and she whispered, I had to be sure. The job was to take the hard drive from a former Mirov Enterprises scientist, but Renata failed to mention was it would be taken from the scientist's dead hands. As the self-driving vehicle moved swiftly along with the dense flow of the transportation tunnel, Renata and Saila sat strapped in facing each other. You may not believe this, but the information is consequential, and the charter movement could use it to change the course of history, Saila bitterly thought in response. But every life is sovereign. Renata continued, Revolutions always come from pain. Give me the technical details on why we are certain the data is safe from encryption. Saila quietly pulled out the local machine to assure her the stolen data remained unencrypted. We piggybacked off of Ayla's air-gapped local machine's charging cord as a trusted device. Then the modified power adapter transmitted the data you verified to your hard drive. And to my powered RAM module, Saila grimly thought. Saila silently reviewed her escape route as Renata reviewed the data. When she was satisfied, Saila pointed to the vehicle's map and said, We have a few more minutes before the arcology will lock down transportation. When Renata turned her head, Saila in a single motion removed the modified network card with a power supply that kept the RAM active and put it in her jacket pocket. While looking at the map, Renata asked, And how do we avoid the security lockdown? Distraction by faking 2 emergencies. Renata turned towards Saila sharply and asked, Why 2 emergencies? As the self-driving cars already began to slow as planned, Saila explained, 2 emergencies will create enough confusion for us to slip through the security lockdown by taking advantage of the quirks of the arcology transportation system. Nouveau made sure modern transportation systems do not have a centralized dispatcher. Renata grimaced at the mention of Nouveau. Tube capacity for each independent vehicle is bid on the prior day, so we used your obscene amount of KFE to bid up capacity in other nodes in order to create traffic in this path. When Saila noticed Renata's eyes glaze over at the extended diatribe, she plugged in the dying-powered RAM module into a longer-lasting power source. 2 emergencies are just enough to temporarily create a traffic spike in this particular intersection. We just initiated the Friends and Family override to follow emergency vehicles to cut through the traffic jam just ahead of the security lockdown. The self-driving vehicle reached the single highest point which opened to a nearly panoramic view of the Arctic. Saila and Renata quietly stood near the windows to see double-hulled freighters traveling the Northwest Passage, lighter-than-air platforms gently floating with the circular polar airflow, and the stretched sun lingering along the edge of the northern horizon. Even for Saila, who grew up in the arcology from its early days, the sight still made her catch her breath. Even though it wasn't mechanically necessary, the designers created beauty in the heart of the transportation system. The haptic band against her ankle vibrated with Sari's final message. The pinch point is coming. Both vehicles will be rising for the next major gravity lift, and I've positioned our vehicle lower at a tilt so it should be an easy hop. Her palms felt clammy at the thought of jumping across moving cars 300 feet in the air. 10, 9, 8. Saila pointed out the window and said, That's where I used to hunt on the glacier with my grandmother when a telecom hub was built next to our homes in Talayok. Then it grew into the arcology. Saila waited for Renata to be fully engaged, so when the door opened, she burst out of her seat restraints and leapt out. Despite the distraction, Renata's hand snaked out whip fast and grabbed the bag holding the unencrypted laptop and yanked Saila back into the car. Saila was momentarily disoriented. Her body caught half out of the car with nothing but open air below, when Renata's voice cut through the tube's airflow. Rojhatkaya agreed that you three can be full members. Then Renata's eyes softened and she said, I thought you believed in the charter. Saila tried to use leverage to pull the bag free, but Renata was immovable. Saila paused to make eye contact and said, I do, but just not your way. Besides, Trina and Akiak would never join Corazon Dieftitisi, so what would happen to them? She stared until Renata dropped her mask, and shame flashed across her face. She let go of the bag and flipped smoothly into the other car. Just before the door closed, she glimpsed Renata's look of betrayal. Sari, Trina, and Akiak all pulled off their masks and laughed in relief as they caught her. Still chuckling, Sari Pramana asked, You already had the powered RAM module. Why fight over the bag? Saila snorted and said, You were the one that taught me to sell the lie. A few days later, tears fell without ceasing as Saila remained stuck, reliving the silence of Ayla's room. Sari simply sat beside her, a gentle hand on her back, saying nothing, exhausted from reliving the moment and from sitting in a pod packed with excited travelers. Saila numbly absorbed the life around her. As everyone waited for a sky tether, an older sister excitedly spoke with her younger brother about the different charter partners, places like the Nakdong Charter Zone, Kachin, and Mosul. Saila smiled when the younger brother piped up and said, Don't forget about Somaliland. They were particularly excited about their new home in the Mirav Arcology Arafura. Their mother hushed them and said softly that it was good to be excited, but to remember that they were uprooting their lives for a new home because no one should have the power to make them afraid for simply being themselves. Are we doing the right thing? Saila whispered hoarsely in Bahasa. Sari was silent for a moment before she answered. My mother had 5 sons, but she always wanted a daughter, so after Isya, she would sit for a while and make doa, a quiet supplication asking for a daughter. She did this every night for 3 years until I was born Ayuputri. A giggle slipped out of Saila at the image of Sari the hacker warrior with a name that exuded femininity, but Sari gave her a firm look and said, Okay, get all the laughs out. I don't even know why I taught you Bahasa. Sari playfully rolled her eyes and smiled as she continued. My mother spent long nights working as staff in the palace of the Sultan of Brunei, so she could dress me like a princess. I lived the life she wanted for me until I attended University Brunei, Darussalam, and heard Lina Barakat speak. She said it was structurally wrong that a system administrator in Mumbai, doing the same work as one in San Francisco, earned pennies. The panel argued about cost of living and real wages. Lina said value is value, and calling it anything else is disequity. Saila noticed that even decades later, the memory still affected the usually unflappable Sari Pramana, or, when she was in a mood, Pramana Sari. After the lecture, Lina spoke to a smaller group. She said the reason there is so much political violence is simple. The European political model forced on the rest of the world is missing a structural feature. It has no pressure release valve. That valve is a place for the minorities created by a state-based monoculture to go, without conditions or restrictions. And it works, not because it is morally better, but because it is not dependent on people being good. I have been called comrade in public only when I was useful. Sari let the word comrade carry its own contempt. The charter does not require good people to work, wherever its principles are central. Under dictators, prime ministers, or councils of mullahs, nobody has been executed for political differences. So yes, I think it is the right thing even for a black-hearted, self-interested person like me. Saila remembered how she felt as a 13-year-old hearing Sari's stories about being with Lina Barakat when the North Korean regime signed the charter, agreeing to close Yodok and to send anyone set to be executed or sent to camps into exile in exchange for trade. She remembered Sari's story of sharing with millions across the Sahel, through radio stations, how to reach an AI by phone that would repeat explanations step by step, clarifying with limitless patience how to build nearly anything using local materials. Saila remembered she joined the charter movement to refactor the world's operating system, so sovereignty does not come from a country, but instead comes from every life in it, because every life is sovereign. Saila remembered and smiled. Arcology, 2045. After weeks of slow, inexpensive travel westward from the Arctic to Australia aboard a vast hybrid airship, Saila and Sari finally arrived with their cohort of travelers. Saila spent long hours explaining how arcology life was skill-based rather than degree-based, so everyone learned multiple hard and soft skills. One day might be financial modeling, and the next spot welding a seam. She learned that the family with the excited older sister and younger brother were Sikhs headed to arcology to join an established community. Saila and Sari could have taken a direct flight, but that would have drawn the additional scrutiny that comes with jet traffic. Every arcology has the same set of constraints, but each develops slightly different solutions. So for Saila, moving to a new arcology felt like wearing someone else's shoes. During the trip, Sari helped Saila liquidate her living space shares in Ukyuk and acquire new Arafura living space shares. Saila was happy to see her hard work investing in common space tasks pay off. On their way to the new living space, Sari explained, after Mirov Enterprises allowed Arafura to join the charter, it received vastly more charter members than other arcologies. Nobody ever abandons their home community without an overwhelmingly compelling reason. And every new arrival wants two things: dignity and security. At the mention of security, Sari obliquely pointed to a security drone with her eyebrows. Saila remembered when Trina first arrived in Ukyuk as an orphan. She never explained what happened to her parents, but she joined a throng of similar people desperately seeking a safe place. Everywhere they went, people in uniforms called them the same thing in a dozen different languages, but it all meant the same: Begona. When did being a stranger become a crime? Saila remembered the words, I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. But in a world of closed borders, filled with myths that tie people to the land for millennia, there are no safe places. So an 11-year-old followed a kind family into a rubber dinghy, pulled by a motorboat that promised to take them somewhere safe. Trina barely survived the trip, and to this day, she is filled with terror at the sight of waves. She arrived in Ukyuk broken and caring for a 2-year-old she loved more than her own life. In the beginning, she lived a survivor's lifestyle and broke every rule, but eventually she welcomed having rules, even if she bent them just like everyone else. Saila looked around Arafura and saw Trina in every face, eased by the presence of pervasive security, knowing if they so chose, they could leave for another charter partner at a moment's notice. Saila was distracted by the near familiarity of the new arcology. Unlike Ukyuk, which had been only superficially changed by officially joining the charter, Arafura absorbed a slice of humanity that arrived with dreams of the stars. She nearly missed the stranger waiting for them in their new living space. An electric wave of betrayal hit Saila as Sari blocked the exit with her body, shaking her head and pointing toward the figure. Lena Barakat stood before her, the single most recognizable person in the world, known by well over 5 billion people as synonymous with the life-transforming charter movement. Lena's eyes were filled with fire as she stepped forward and extended her hand in friendship. I need you to be a witness at the trial of Coercion Dieftetaici and Renata Gomez for the murder of Ayla Hamisi. Author's note: this novel began as a response to 2 troubling global trends. The first is the growing comfort with nuclear appeasement. The second is the steady rise of global political violence. Through this story, I wanted to explore the dangers of both while offering a possible path forward through the idea of the Charter, a political framework built to redefine what a state can be. This book is the first in a planned 9-part series. The first trilogy begins in a near-future world, grounded in realism and science, and its later volumes move beyond Earth to the cloud cities of Venus and the scavenger worlds of dead civilizations where technology has become indistinguishable from magic. The second trilogy carries these ideas into a fantasy realm. The third trilogy unites both universes into one. The Charter and its principles form the through line of the entire series, expressed in its central creed: every life is sovereign. If you have listened this far, thank you. Please consider liking or subscribing to help this story and its message reach more people.